The fluorescent lights hummed the frequency of my own panic as Marcus offered me a courtesy call, a polite word for the engineered collapse of my entire life. I thought I was immune to surprises, but my diligence at Sentinel Global had just triggered a тяжкое обвинение and the theft of everything I owned. The fluorescent lights of the sterile, windowless room hummed with a low, unsettling frequency that seemed to sync with the frantic beat of my own heart. I traced the edge of the cheap laminated table with a damp thumb. Across from me sat Marcus. Marcus, who 3 weeks ago was my trusted, almost brotherly colleague at Sentinel Global, now looked like a stranger wearing my old friend's tailored suit. His eyes, usually warm, were flat, focused with the unsettling intensity of a predator assessing its prey. "Look, Leo," Marcus began, his voice meticulously modulated, stripped of any previous warmth. "This is a courtesy call, an internal matter. No need to escalate this into something messy." Messy. That was the new euphemism for having your entire professional and personal life ripped apart by the corporate compliance division. Sentinel Global wasn't just a hedge fund. It was a labyrinth of high-stakes finance and, as I was rapidly discovering, deeper, darker currents involving international security contracts. I had been at Sentinel for 8 years. I built my career on risk assessment, on finding the tiny weak points in complex systems. I thought I was immune to surprises. I was catastrophically wrong. It started with the audit, a routine deep dive into the offshore holdings for the Viridian project. I flagged an anomaly, a transaction too large, routed through 3 shell companies in rapid succession. I did my job. I reported it up the chain. That was my mistake. My diligence was interpreted not as loyalty, but as interference. Now I was in this glorified interrogation room, facing Marcus, who had somehow fast-tracked his way to Vice President of Internal Affairs, a role that seemed to have appeared overnight just to handle my case. "Messy how, Marcus?" I managed, my voice tight. I tried to project calm, the kind of detached confidence I used when closing a $50 million deal, but my hands, hidden under the table, were shaking. I provided the documentation requested. The Viridian file is clean from my end. I flagged potential money movement issues, exactly as mandated by Protocol 7B. Marcus leaned forward, placing a sleek black tablet on the table. It lit up, displaying my name, Leo Vance, in stark red font, overlaid with various flags: high risk, non-compliant, external interest. "Leo, we appreciate your history here. Truly, you've been invaluable. But the landscape has changed. The client, the primary client for Viridian, has expressed concerns regarding the integrity of our internal oversight." "Concerns about my integrity?" I challenged, pushing the tablet back slightly. "Because I noticed irregularities? Are you telling me that spotting fraud is now grounds for suspension?" Marcus sighed, a performance of weary professionalism. "It's not about fraud, Leo. It's about trust. We operate in sensitive areas, areas that touch, well, areas where national security interests intersect with global finance. When a transaction of that magnitude is flagged, we don't just check the ledger, we check the individual." He paused, letting the unspoken threat hang heavy in the air. This wasn't HR. This was something harder, colder. The internal audit revealed an unacceptable level of opacity surrounding your personal financial activity over the last 18 months. Your investment diversification, your real estate acquisitions, they don't align with your declared compensation package, Leo. Not even close. My blood ran cold. My acquisitions were strategic, yes, but entirely legal. I'd made smart moves in the crypto market 6 months before they peaked, reinvesting every penny immediately into long-term assets. How could they know the granular details of my private portfolio that intimately? My finances are my own business, Marcus. I've complied with all SEC and corporate disclosure requirements. You have no legal standing to demand access to my private bank records unless you have concrete proof of wrongdoing, such as embezzlement or insider trading, neither of which has been alleged. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's where you're wrong, Leo. We aren't using SEC regulations here. We are operating under a specific, extremely high-level corporate mandate. It's about mitigating exposure. You see, the primary client has a very stringent vetting process. They call it the Family Security Protocol. He tapped the tablet again, and a new document loaded. It wasn't a Sentinel Global form. It looked like a standard non-disclosure agreement, but the signatories were unfamiliar. A shadowy consulting firm I'd never heard of, and a governmental oversight body whose acronym made my stomach clench. They need absolute reassurance that their capital isn't financing destabilizing elements, Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, making it all the more menacing. And that assurance requires complete, unhindered transparency into every aspect of your financial existence. Every checking account, every brokerage, every crypto wallet, every savings bond, Leo. Every single dollar you control or have ever controlled. I stared at the tablet, the demand written out in cold, legalistic language. They didn't just want to see the trail. They wanted the keys to the vault. This is insane. This is an invasion of privacy that borders on extortion. It borders on keeping your life intact, Marcus countered sharply. If you refuse access to your accounts, the implication becomes clear. You have something to hide. And when that happens, the internal investigation escalates immediately. The access request is automatically converted into a formal inquiry under suspicion of aiding foreign entities. A very serious accusation, Leo. It leads to an immediate freeze on all your assets and a very long conversation with the authorities regarding charges related to a тяжкое обвинение. The word hung there, heavy and toxic. A serious criminal accusation, just for protecting my privacy. If I sign this, I said slowly, trying to process the level of corporate control they were exerting, and give you the login credentials, what then? You review everything, and then what? Then, Marcus said, retrieving a pristine fountain pen from his inner jacket pocket, we determine if the family security of our primary client is truly protected. If everything aligns, the flags come down. You keep your job, your assets remain untouched, and this whole conversation evaporates into the corporate ether. A minor administrative hiccup. He pushed the tablet toward me again, along with a physical document, the authorization for full banking access. But if you refuse, Leo, Sentinel Global will be legally obligated to treat you as an active risk. And trust me, when the internal checks turn into an investigation focused on preventing attempts to slomat жизнь уголовкой, they don't stop at your office door. They go home. They talk to your family. They contact your landlord. They make sure the repercussions are comprehensive. I looked at the pen, then at Marcus's unblinking eyes. My entire future, my apartment, my savings, my freedom, was contingent on handing over the digital keys to my life to a man who looked ready to watch me drown. I pictured my retirement fund, the carefully cultivated buffer against the uncertainty of life, vanishing into their scrutiny. Could I really stand up to this massive, invisible corporate machine? Could I risk the nightmare scenario Marcus had so vividly painted? My fingers trembled as I reached for the pen, the heavy metal cool against my skin. I had to know what they were really looking for. If they wanted access, they were looking for something specific, something buried deep enough that my own cursory check hadn't found it. If I refused, they'd find the justification to take everything anyway, leaving me defenseless. I took a deep, ragged breath and signed the authorization form, the stroke of the pen feeling like a final surrender. Marcus leaned back, a flicker of something, relief, triumph, crossing his face. He took the signed document, scanned it with the tablet, and then nodded to his reflection in the dark screen. Good choice, Leo. Now, the passwords. He slid the tablet back. Every account. Now. My throat was dry. I looked at the glowing screen, knowing that once I typed those sequences in, there was no taking it back. I keyed in the username for my primary brokerage account, the one holding the majority of my liquid assets. The login prompt blinked, waiting. I typed the complex string of letters and numbers, my mind screaming a silent protest. The screen refreshed instantly. Marcos didn't even blink. Next, he commanded. The offshore holding through Zurich. I started typing the second password, but before my thumb could hit the final character, the tablet in Marcus's hand chirped, a different, more urgent sound than before. His professional veneer cracked just for a fraction of a second. His eyes widened, darting down to the device he'd been holding. What is it? I demanded, sensing a sudden shift in the power dynamic. Marcos didn't answer. He was staring, utterly frozen, at the screen of his own tablet. His skin had gone pale beneath the fluorescent glare. Then he slowly looked up at me, and the look in his eyes was pure, undiluted panic. Leo, he whispered, his voice catching. The Zurich account. It was flagged on our side the moment you logged in. Not for risk. It triggered a lockdown. We can't access it anymore. It's locked down from the outside. And Leo, the system just sent a notification. That account, it was emptied 3 minutes ago. All of it. Gone. The air in the small room seemed to compress, making it suddenly too thick to breathe. Emptied. 3 minutes ago. While I was sitting across from Marcus, handing over the keys to my digital life, someone had executed a digital heist on my most secure vault. What do you mean, locked down from the outside? I managed to grind out, the tremor in my voice betraying the sudden surge of adrenaline. My mind raced, flipping through scenarios. If I'd been compromised before handing over the passwords, why demand them now? If Marcus's internal network was monitoring the login attempt, why did they only discover the theft after I initiated access? Marcus's composure had shattered completely. He snatched the tablet back, frantically tapping the screen, zooming in on the notification receipt, his breathing shallow and rapid. This isn't right. The internal security sweep was supposed to isolate the connection, not trigger an immediate quarantine protocol. If this account was compromised externally, why were you brought in here demanding access? Why did the Viridian file suddenly escalate today? He looked utterly lost, his VP title suddenly seeming like a thin costume over a terrified junior analyst. The supposed power structure had inverted in an instant. I wasn't the suspect anymore. I was the recipient of a catastrophe, and Marcus was trapped in the fallout. Marcus, stop tapping that thing and think, I snapped, leaning across the table. The moment I initiated the login for the Zurich account, your system registered it, correct? And immediately it locked down and reported a massive withdrawal. Who else knew I was attempting to access that account right now? He shook his head violently, sweat beading on his forehead. No one. Only me, you, and the central server routing the data stream. Unless the original flag that brought you here wasn't an audit finding at all. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The anomalies in the Viridian file, my meticulous reporting. It hadn't been an audit that got me pulled in. It was a lure. A carefully constructed trap designed not to catch me committing a crime, but to force me to interact with one specific digital asset, the Zurich account, at a precise moment. They needed me to try and log in, I stated flatly, the horror of the manipulation dawning. They needed to know the moment I touched that account to execute the withdrawal. Why? If they already stole the money, why did they need my credentials? To clean the trail, Marcus muttered, his eyes wide with dawning comprehension of his own unwitting role. They didn't want the withdrawal to look like a random breach. They wanted it to look like a successful internal transfer, or, even better, A transfer authorized by the owner immediately before the account was frozen by our system response to the external audit flag.
It was brilliant, in a sickening Machiavellian way. By forcing me to log in during the investigation, they made it appear as if I was either A, distracting the internal team while the theft happened, or B, authorizing the drain myself under duress, only to have the system lock itself down before I could make a full transfer or clear the remaining funds. "The paperwork I just signed," I said, my voice dangerously low. "Giving you access to everything else? It's the smokescreen. You look like the concerned compliance officer who caught a thief trying to empty his final account while being interrogated." Marcus slammed his fist silently on the table, his control gone. "They used me to box you in, and they used your investigation to mask the time of the theft. Who is they, Leo?"
Who is the primary client that needed family security enough to engineer this? I shook my head, trying to rewind my memory banks, filtering everything through this new lens of calculated betrayal. Sentinel Global handled massive sensitive contracts for governments, intelligence sectors, and defense contractors. The Viridian project was rumored to be tied to securing communication lines for a major allied power overseas, a highly protected network. "The primary client," I said, focusing on the acronym on the screen. "They're deep into geopolitical risk management. They hired us because they trust our non-governmental shield. They would only deploy a protocol this extreme if they suspected someone internal was already working against them." "But you weren't working against them," Marcus protested, his voice cracking with self-preservation. "You flagged the transaction." "Maybe the flag was the tell," I countered, leaning back, suddenly feeling a grim sense of clarity. Maybe I wasn't supposed to spot a weak point in the transaction. Maybe I was supposed to spot a weak point in the security layer protecting the transaction, and the people who put that layer there are the ones who stole the money. The implications were staggering. This wasn't corporate espionage. This smelled like a high-level internal purge, executed under the guise of security protection. Someone within the inner circle of the primary client, or perhaps high up in Sentinel, had decided to cut out a perceived threat, me, by framing me for asset depletion during a crucial security review. "We need to trace those funds immediately," I urged. "Zurich will have a withdrawal record. We need the recipient wallet addresses." Marcus swallowed hard, tapping furiously again, but his efforts were fruitless. "It's not showing up on the internal routing system anymore, Leo. It vanished from the ledger the moment the lockdown initiated. It's like the funds evaporated into thin air. No trace. The network is scrubbing the data as we watch." I stared at the empty space on the tablet where the Zurich account balance used to be displayed, now replaced by the generic red high risk banner. "If you can't trace the money, then we have to trace the protocol," I insisted. "The family security mandate. That has to be documented somewhere accessible, a higher authority than you or me. Who signed off on pulling me into this room based on that mandate?" Marcus looked down at the original file documentation, the one listing the requirements for Viridian review. He pointed a trembling finger at the bottom of the page, not at the client's signature, but at the internal approval stamp. "Me," he admitted weakly. "I signed the authorization to escalate the audit to this level after the initial anomaly report. But Leo, I only signed it based on the classification attached to the Viridian Project security profile. That profile is managed by Dr. Helena Voss." Helena Voss, the Chief Compliance Officer for Sentinel Global. A woman famous for her ruthlessness, her almost cult-like devotion to security protocols, and her rumored connections to various intelligence agencies before joining the private sector. She was the ultimate gatekeeper. "Where is she now?" I demanded. Marcus nervously checked his watch, then pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen, accessing the company directory, something he wouldn't dare do if this were a truly safe environment. "Voss, she's supposed to be in London for a conference," he murmured, scrolling through location trackers. His face went slack as he read the update. "No,
She just checked out of the London hotel 3 hours ago. A private jet filed a flight plan for an unscheduled landing at a remote airstrip upstate. He looked up at me, his voice barely audible above the room's incessant hum.
Leo, that airstrip services the secure facility used by that private defense contractor we briefly worked with last year, the one specializing in off-the-books asset extraction. The same one that uses that specialized, near untraceable blockchain architecture. My heart hammered against my ribs. Helena Voss wasn't merely overseeing the security, she was initiating the extraction and framing me simultaneously. She was the one who manufactured the need for my cooperation, just long enough to ensure the theft looked like my doing during a high-stakes internal review. "She's not just cleaning up the trail, Marcos," I whispered, standing up, suddenly feeling the need to be out of this room before the actual authorities arrived, alerted by Marcus's unauthorized access to sensitive data. "She's making sure the person who could trace the money is discredited and incarcerated. If she's heading to that facility, she's either leaving the country or preparing the next phase of the attack." I grabbed my jacket. This was no longer about saving my reputation. It was about escaping a meticulously planned takedown. "We're leaving. Now. We don't go through the main lobby. I need access to the emergency exit logs for this floor. If Voss is heading to that airstrip, she knows the clock is ticking before the Zurich account breach is officially reported to external banking regulators." Marcus hesitated for a dangerous second, his eyes darting toward the heavy steel door. "If we leave, Leo, it looks like flight. It confirms every suspicion they have about us colluding." "We're already implicated, Marcus. The money is gone, and I signed a document giving them access to everything else. Remaining here guarantees I'm handed over to internal security and then transferred to federal custody based on fabricated evidence of unauthorized asset movement. I'd rather run towards the person who set the trap than wait for them to deliver the executioner." I pointed at the door controls.
"The logs, Marcos. Now. I need to know if anyone has been alerted to this meeting yet. If Voss has already made the official report, the building security will be switched to external enforcement protocols any minute." Marcus frantically accessed the console near the door. His face went utterly ashen as the screen blinked green, then immediately flashed a critical amber warning. "Leo, they didn't just alert internal security," he choked out, pointing at a scrolling message. "They bypassed it. External response team confirmed entry into the lobby 5 minutes ago. Code red. And the message says Dr. Voss requested immediate apprehension of both parties involved in the suspicious data interaction concerning the Zurich asset." The hum of the lights seemed to fade as a new sound rose up from below, the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots on marble flooring, moving fast, moving directly toward this floor. We weren't just being investigated anymore. We were fugitives, caught red-handed in the middle of a corporate frame job, and the boots were already on the stairs. The thudding boots echoed the frantic drumming in my chest. 5 minutes. They had moved with terrifying speed once the withdrawal was confirmed. Voss hadn't just set a trap. She deployed a rapid response unit the moment the bait was taken. "Marcus, the fire escape. Now!" I didn't wait for his consent. I slammed my shoulder against the emergency release bar on the interior door, the heavy metal groaning in protest, before swinging inward to reveal a dusty, narrow metal stairwell, the forgotten artery of the high-rise. Marcus scrambled after me, his expensive leather shoes slipping slightly on the grated metal steps. He was hyperventilating, clinging to the railing as if it were the only thing tethering him to reality. "They'll have access to the building schematics. They'll know where this leads."
"They know where it should lead," I countered, already taking the steps 2 at a time, adrenaline sharpening my focus. "But compliance offices rarely use the service routes. They rely on clean lines of sight and internal elevators. We take the ugly route. How many floors down to the sub-level maintenance corridor?"
"Level B2, but that corridor's sealed off. It leads only to the main electrical vault. It's a dead end unless you have level 7 clearance to override the magnetic locks."
"I don't need clearance," I grunted, leaping over a landing. "I need leverage. Remember the audit I was supposedly conducting? The one that uncovered the Viridian anomaly? I pulled the preliminary schematics for the building's entire network infrastructure last week, backup for my compliance review. I have hard copies in my messenger bag. The override sequence for the B2 lock is a 2-factor physical bypass. I reached my messenger bag, which I'd been clutching instinctively. It contained my laptop and the physical contingency files I always carried, the very files that now potentially condemned me. As I fumbled with the zippers while descending, I heard a sharp metallic clang from the floor above us. They'd found the door we left ajar. "They're on the stairwell!" Marcus yelled, sounding genuinely terrified. I didn't waste breath answering. I reached the B2 landing. The corridor was dark, smelling faintly of ozone and damp concrete. Ahead, a massive, reinforced door, thick enough to withstand a direct blast, sat inert. The magnetic lock panel glowed an angry, unyielding red. I pulled out the schematics, crude, heavily annotated printouts, and spread them against the cold metal of the door. The sequence was insane. Bypass the primary circuit breaker by overloading the auxiliary cooling line, then physically reroute the emergency power coupling to feed the manual release solenoid. It was designed to be an absolute nightmare to disable quickly.
Marcus, I need you to watch the stairwell entrance. If you see any light, any silhouette, yell. I need 10 minutes, undisturbed. He nodded dumbly, pressing himself into the shadows near the landing above, his fear momentarily channeled into vigilance. I got to work. My hands, usually precise, were clumsy with adrenaline, but muscle memory kicked in. I found the nearest access panel, a tiny, bolted plate tucked near the floor, and wrenched it open with a multi-tool I always kept attached to my keys. Sparks showered as I manipulated the dense tangle of wiring. I located the cooling line shunt, cut the casing, and jammed the bypass tool in. A dull, sickening thunk resonated through the floor as the primary power diverted. The magnetic lock panel flickered violently, the red light sputtering. Success. But the sound of that bypass was loud, a distinct electrical surge that carried through the building's infrastructure. "They heard that, Leo," Marcus hissed from the landing above. "I see figures moving down. They're not careful anymore." I ignored him, moving to the second step. The emergency power coupling was hidden behind a dummy conduit pipe 20 feet down the corridor. I sprinted, slammed my shoulder into the pipe, snapping the cheap casing, and revealed the heavy, insulated coupling beneath. This was the dangerous part. If I crossed the wires wrong, I wouldn't just be trapped, I'd be vaporized. I reread the schematic one last time, my breath catching in my throat. Cross-connect the blue to the yellow shunt, then ground the residual current through the door's own casing, a brute force technique that bypassed all monitoring. I jammed the wires together. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening crack, the lights in the B2 corridor exploded in a shower of blinding white light. The magnetic door shuddered, then hissed violently as the locking mechanisms retracted, revealing the black void of the maintenance tunnel beyond. "Go, go, go!" I yelled, yanking Marcus away from the stairwell just as two figures in dark tactical gear rounded the corner above. They weren't building security. They were professionals. They carried equipment that didn't belong in a corporate environment. We plunged into the darkness of the maintenance tunnel. I hit the manual override on the door panel just as the first figure reached the landing. The heavy door slammed shut with a resounding boom, the locks re-engaging, but without the full power grid, they wouldn't hold for long. We scrambled forward through the maze of pipes and conduits, flashlights useless in the thick, oily air. We needed to find an access point to the outside world, a ventilation shaft, a utility exit, anything that bypassed the main lobby security grid. "Where are we going?" Marcus gasped, tripping over a thick cable. "Away from Sentinel Tower," I managed. "Voss has flagged us for external enforcement. They won't waste time on internal questioning. They'll move straight to detainment, or worse, neutralization, to secure the narrative." We navigated blindly for what felt like an eternity, the sound of the hammering against the B2 door growing louder, more desperate. Suddenly, the floor beneath us vibrated violently. Not just the banging, something heavy was moving, rolling, approaching fast. "What is that sound?" Marcus stammered,
freezing in place. I pulled out my phone, surprisingly still functional, and used its light to scan the tunnel ahead. It wasn't a person. It was a maintenance cart, a large motorized vehicle used for hauling heavy equipment, and it was careening down the tunnel toward us at speed. It wasn't being driven. It was unmanned, clearly having been sent down the line deliberately to sweep the tunnel clear. "It's a sweep protocol!" I yelled, grabbing Marcus's arm and yanking him toward a narrow crawlspace opening barely large enough for a person.
"Get in!" We squeezed into the cramped, dusty space just as the cart roared past, its heavy wheels rattling the conduit pipes inches from our heads. The blast of displaced air almost sucked us back into the main corridor. On the other side of the crawlspace, the tunnel opened into a wider concrete chamber. I recognized the architecture from the old blueprints. The main city sewage and utility outflow junction, right beneath the tower's foundation. It was messy, unpleasant, but it offered a path out into the city's underground arteries, far from any main thoroughfare. As we crawled out, shaking off dust and grime, I checked my phone one last time for any signal. Nothing. But I saw a brief, desperate text message flash across my screen from an encrypted service I hadn't used in years. A secure channel reserved only for my former military intelligence contact, Sparrow. It was an automated alert triggered by my profile going hot on global watch lists, signaling extreme danger. The message was short, brutal, and terrifying. "They know you have the drive. Voss is extracting everything, including the original Viridian data. Do not contact me. Go dark. She has authorization to use lethal force for asset recovery. Your only hope is the secondary transfer point, Sector 4 Gamma. Do not deviate." The drive. I'd almost forgotten the real reason for the Viridian anomaly. It wasn't just about suspicious money movement. It was about a physical storage device, a secure memory core hidden deep within the Viridian project files that held proof of Voss's entire network of illegal security contracts. I hadn't accessed it yet, but Voss knew I had the potential to. Before I could relay this critical new information to Marcus, the air in the utility junction filled with a high-pitched whine. It wasn't coming from the tower above. It was coming from above the junction, the street level. I looked up through a grated ventilation shaft cover overhead. Two blinding spotlights cut through the grimy darkness of the chamber. They weren't using the stairs or the tunnel entrance. They were coming straight down. A dark shape, low to the ground, was being lowered rapidly by a winch system from the street above. "Repelling team!" I roared, grabbing Marcus. "They are bypassing the structure entirely!" The shape hit the ground with a muffled thud, immediately spreading out. They were too organized, too well-equipped for simple corporate security. These were specialists in rapid retrieval, likely the same group Voss used for her off-the-books extractions. I shoved Marcus toward the deeper, blacker recesses of the outflow junction. "Hide! I need to draw them away from the main passage." I didn't wait to see if he obeyed. I turned and ran in the opposite direction, away from the perceived safety of the junction's exit, sprinting toward a secondary maintenance ladder leading up toward a street-level maintenance access hatch. I needed a distraction, a target they couldn't ignore. If I could just reach that hatch, I might buy us enough time to reach Sector 4 Gamma, whatever that was. I vaulted over a rusted pipe just as a sharp, focused beam of light swept across the wall beside my head, followed by a dull thwack as something impacted the concrete where my skull had been a second before. They weren't using standard weaponry. They were using highly specialized, non-lethal capture gear, the kind designed to render a target unconscious immediately without causing permanent injury, ensuring the asset could be interrogated later. I reached the ladder, scrambling upward toward the faint promise of streetlight filtering through the grate above. I could hear the coordinated movement below. They were splitting up, two pursuing me, two securing Marcus's last known position near the junction. I reached the heavy circular grate of the access hatch. It was secured with a triple lock mechanism,
designed to keep anything from coming out as much as keeping people from coming in. I braced my feet against the ladder rungs, pulled out the last of my lock-picking tools, and started working feverishly on the first tumbler. Click. One down. Below me, I heard a shout, not from the pursuit team, but from Marcus near the junction entrance. A sound of profound shock, followed by a choked gasp. I risked a glance down, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The pursuit team had found him. One operative had Marcus pinned against the wall, while the second raised a device, a specialized restraint unit, not a simple taser. Then, the operative holding Marcus suddenly stiffened, dropping his restraint tool. He looked up, not at me, but directly toward the main maintenance corridor we just fled, his expression transitioning from aggressive capture to stark terror. A new figure entered the maintenance chamber, silhouetted against the faint emergency lighting from the tower above. It wasn't a heavy tactical team. This figure moved with a chilling predatory grace, taller, leaner, and wearing dark tailored clothing that looked disturbingly familiar. It was Marcus, but it wasn't my Marcus. The figure radiating cold authority was looking down at the operative who had been holding the other Marcus, my Marcus, and spoke in a voice that resonated with chilling control. A voice I recognized from high-level encrypted calls I used to overhear in the executive suites. "You were sloppy," the new figure, the real Marcus perhaps, said to the bewildered tactical operative. "You were supposed to secure the target quietly. Now the asset Vance is aware of the double cross." He then looked directly toward my hiding spot near the hatch, a slow, knowing smirk spreading across his face. "And now, Leo, you have nowhere left to run except right back into my arms." The air in the maintenance chamber crystallized around the realization. There were two Marcuses. Or rather, the man I thought was my terrified colleague, the panicked VP who had just signed away my bank access, was merely a decoy, a planted asset. The real Marcus, the one speaking with icy authority, was someone far higher up the chain, someone who knew about the Zurich theft before I did, and someone who was clearly playing both sides. The decoy Marcus, the one I had just dragged through the B2 tunnels, was now on the ground, unconscious, or worse, the victim of his own operative. The tactical team hadn't been sent by Voss to capture us. They had been sent by this Marcus to secure the decoy and eliminate the chance of that asset revealing the true scope of the operation. I froze halfway up the ladder, my hands locked onto the rungs, the tumbler lock half-picked. The real Marcus, the one who looked like a darker, far more dangerous version of my former colleague, didn't even spare a glance for the operative he had just chastised. His entire focus was on the dark silhouette of my head above the grate. "Don't struggle, Leo," the real Marcus called up, his voice carrying easily in the confined space, laced with the same familiar cadence that used to reassure me during high-risk deals. "That secondary contact, Sparrow, he's already compromised. He sent you to Sector 4 Gamma because he knew I'd be watching Sector 4 Gamma. This entire escape route was predetermined. Voss is expecting you, and I have the extraction team in position above you. You're moving from one secure holding cell to another." My blood turned to ice. Sparrow. My last desperate lifeline. He hadn't been trying to save me. He had been funneling me directly into the primary extraction point, orchestrated by the man who was now staring me down. Voss wasn't the only player. She was the visible hand, but this man, the true Marcus, was the puppet master, using my own security fears against me. "Why?" I forced the word out, my voice raspy from the dust and shock. "Why the elaborate setup? Why frame me for emptying the Zurich account?" The real Marcus tilted his head, a gesture of amused disdain. "The Zurich funds were a necessary sacrifice, an insurance policy. It was never about the money, Leo. It was about the narrative. Voss needed a scapegoat for the Viridian breach, and you were too effective at spotting the real red flags. But I needed you alive, at least long enough to confirm the physical security measures on the drive. He gestured toward the tactical operative still standing near the downed decoy. The drive you flagged in the Viridian file, the one Voss is so desperately trying to retrieve, it's not just data. It's a physical encryption key tied to something much larger than Sentinel Global. It proves who authorized the illegal backdoors Voss installed across 3 allied defense networks. Voss is trying to save her operation. I'm trying to save my life by presenting definitive proof of her treason. He took a slow, deliberate step toward the ladder. I needed you to panic, to use your contingency routes, to prove that the security protocols I designed, the ones you were never supposed to find, were still active. Now that you've activated the emergency shutdown on the B2 lock and confirmed the integrity of the utility bypasses, I know the system hasn't been fully penetrated by Voss's people. We are still secure enough for Phase 2. Phase 2? I choked out, my fingers fumbling frantically with the final lock tumbler. I could feel the pressure mounting. I had to get out of this hole before the external team above decided to just winch the grate open. Phase 2 is partnership, Leo, the Marcus lookalike said, his voice softening into the conspiratorial tone I remembered from years ago.
Voss is finished. She thought she could use the Zurich theft to frame you and secure the drive for herself. But I control the extraction team now. I need the drive decrypted, and you are the only one with the necessary cognitive access keys that Voss didn't manage to strip from you. He held up his hand, showing a small encrypted satellite communicator. Meet me at Sector 4 Gamma. We bring Voss down together. You get your life back, full exoneration, and a promotion that makes your old salary look like pocket change. Refuse, and I have to assume you're working with Voss, and I can't afford to leave loose ends, especially not ones who know the layout of my contingency tunnels.
The threat was clear. Side with the devil I know, or be eliminated by the tactical unit that answered only to him. My heart pounded a rhythm of betrayal against my ribs. The decoy Marcus was still down, suggesting the real Marcus had just revealed himself by eliminating his own subordinate for a momentary lapse in execution. This was a viper pit, and I was caught between 2 deadly snakes, both wearing Marcus's face. The final tumbler gave way. The heavy steel grate shuddered, ready to be pushed open. Below me, the real Marcus smiled, a chilling, empty expression. He raised the satellite phone to his ear. Unit 1, status report. Target is ascending to street level via hatch Delta. Do not engage until he is fully exposed. I want him alive for transport to Gamma. He lowered the phone, his eyes fixed on mine. You have 5 seconds, Leo. Pushing that grate open is your final audition. I pushed. The heavy metal scraped loudly against the concrete lip, revealing a dizzying glimpse of the city night above, a dark alleyway, slick with recent rain. Freedom, or another trap baited with the promise of it? As I braced myself to climb out, pulling my exhausted body through the narrow opening, a shadow fell over me from above. It wasn't the tactical team waiting patiently.
It was a single massive figure, positioned directly over the hatch, blocking the light. Before I could react, a heavy-gloved hand clamped around my ankle. I was jerked violently backward, slipping on the sleek ladder rungs. My grip failed. I fell backward, not onto the ladder, but plummeting into the darkness of the utility chamber, right toward the real Marcus, who was now watching my descent with detached interest. As I tumbled, my hand instinctively scrabbled for purchase, catching the edge of the metal grate I had just opened. My fingers scraped against the metal lip, and I saw it, a faint, almost invisible incision mark on the underside of the grate, a symbol that matched a faded tattoo on the arm of the unconscious decoy. It wasn't just a hatch, it was his contingency route too. The fall ended with a jarring impact against the concrete floor, knocking the wind from my lungs. Above me, the grate slammed shut with a final deafening clang, plunging the chamber into near total darkness, save for the faint flickering emergency lamps. I gasped for air, realizing I hadn't fallen near the real Marcus. I'd landed right beside the decoy, who was now stirring weakly. But the real Marcus was gone. He had stepped back just before I fell. Then, a voice boomed, not from the ground level, but echoing from the tunnel where the maintenance cart had been sent to sweep. It was the voice of the tactical team leader, communicating through his radio, his voice crackling with confusion. "Command, we have lost visual on Subject Vance. Target appears to have vanished from the chamber. Wait, we are detecting an unauthorized high-speed drone launch signature originating directly from the utility junction access point overhead." I looked up, straining to see through the darkness. The grate I had just struggled to open was silently rising again, being pulled from the street level by a high-powered winch system. I was trapped in the pit, and the real Marcus, or perhaps Voss's team now redirected, was sending something down to retrieve me. Then I heard a distinct whirring sound directly above the opening grate, growing rapidly louder, a mechanical sound that promised capture, or worse. It wasn't a rappelling rope, it was a drone, sleek and dark, descending with speed and precision directly toward my location. The whirring intensified, transforming from a distant buzz into a focused predatory hum directly above the sealed grate. I pushed myself away from the stirring decoy Marcus, scrambling towards the deeper recesses of the outflow junction where the shadows were thickest. The drone was coming fast, descending straight into the pit, a highly specialized retrieval unit, far too advanced for standard corporate security. This confirmed it. The real Marcus had consolidated control, and he was sending in his elite retrieval package, likely equipped with high-grade incapacitating agents to secure me before I could reach Sector 4 Gamma. I glanced at the decoy Marcus, who was groaning, starting to regain consciousness. He was still a variable, a liability. I had no time for him. My mind flashed back to Sparrow's cryptic message, "Do not deviate. Sector 4 Gamma." I scanned the chamber, ignoring the mounting sound of the descending drone. I needed to find an alternate exit, something Sparrow knew about that the real Marcus, focused only on his own pre-planned routes, wouldn't anticipate. My eyes landed on a section of the concrete wall that looked subtly different, a large square patch that seemed less weathered than the rest. It was a maintenance plug, designed for accessing primary water mains, an older system, likely decommissioned and therefore ignored by both Voss's and the real Marcus's sophisticated digital mapping. The drone was now close enough that I could hear the snap of its rotors cutting the stale air. I risked a quick look up. The machine was large, hovering just above the opening, its landing struts deploying. It carried no visible weapons, but I knew these retrieval units were equipped with powerful sonic incapacitators or chemical dispersal nozzles. I pulled the multi-tool from my belt, ignoring the throbbing pain in my ankle from the fall. I jammed the tool into the faint seam of the maintenance plug and leveraged with all my remaining strength. The plug groaned, then popped outward with a wet, sucking sound, revealing a tight vertical shaft descending into absolute blackness. The old mains line. "Sorry, Marcus," I muttered to the recovering decoy, and then I launched myself headfirst into the opening, sliding down the slick, cold pipe just as the drone descended into the junction chamber. I heard the distinct hiss as the drone deployed its payload, not an explosion, but a slow, chemical fog billowing out into the junction where I had just been standing. The tactical team above must have realized their error simultaneously as the comms crackled with panicked reports of "Target Vance missing from Zone Alpha." I slid perhaps 30 feet before the pipe angled sharply, depositing me unceremoniously into a surprisingly dry, concrete-lined tunnel, an old storm drain running parallel to the main city infrastructure, exactly as Sparrow's coded message implied. I pulled out my phone. No signal, but the GPS still functioned, triangulating my rough position against city schematics I'd memorized years ago. I wasn't near Sector 4 Gamma yet, but I was moving in the right direction, away from the tower and the control grid the real Marcus dominated. I ran. The final leg of the escape was pure, desperate endurance. I pushed through ankle-deep stagnant water, ignoring the stench,
focusing only on the faint directional signal Sparrow had embedded in his emergency alert, a low-frequency pulse guiding me toward the rendezvous point. Finally, the tunnel opened into a vast, echoing chamber, an abandoned subway platform, silent and dark, clearly not used for decades. The air here was cleaner, hinting at ventilation further down the line. And there, standing alone under the harsh beam of a single tactical floodlight aimed down the tracks, was Sparrow. He wasn't the grizzled ex-military contact I expected. He was a woman in her late 20s, dressed in civilian clothes, but possessing the same focused intensity I'd seen in the real Marcus. "You deviated," she stated, not as an accusation, but as a simple observation. Her voice was calm, steady. "Your intelligence led me straight to a secondary trap set by the real Marcus," I countered, limping toward the light. He orchestrated the entire sequence, the Zurich theft, my interrogation, even the decoy Marcus. He's using Voss's network to consolidate power. Why send me here if you knew he was watching the route? Sparrow didn't flinch. She tapped a small device on her wrist. "I sent you here because this platform, Sector 4 Gamma, is shielded. Marcus's remote surveillance can't penetrate the deep magnetic shielding of this old transit line. And more importantly," she paused, her eyes locking onto mine, "I sent you here because you have something he needs more than anything." She stepped forward, pointing not at me, but at the messenger bag still slung across my chest. "The Viridian Drive. It contains proof not only of Voss's illegal network penetration, but proof that the man you know as Marcus, the real one, is not an employee of Sentinel Global at all. He's an internal security specialist embedded by a rival consortium, using Voss's operation as a smokescreen for a corporate takeover." The pieces clicked into place. Marcus wasn't just securing his own assets, he was orchestrating the collapse of Sentinel Global to hand its security infrastructure to his true employer.
"Drive to an authority who can expose both of them," I concluded, reaching for the zipper of my bag. "No," Sparrow said firmly, shaking her head. "There are no clean authorities left in that system. Marcus controls the internal reporting, and Voss controls the external compliance fallout. We don't expose them. We use the drive to leverage ourselves out of the game entirely and ensure they cannibalize each other." She reached into her own jacket and pulled out a device, a broadcast encoder, military grade. "This platform has an emergency fiber optic uplink to a secure satellite relay. It's how we communicate outside major networks. We aren't going to the police. We are going to the press. Specifically, a reporter Voss thought she had neutralized 3 years ago. We leak the decryption key for the drive onto the dark web, encrypted within an untraceable data packet, and simultaneously trigger a self-destruct sequence on the drive once the packet confirms successful transmission." "A self-destruct?" "If the drive is destroyed after transmission, Voss can't retrieve it, and Marcus can't use it to frame anyone else. But the leaked data, the proof of their entire operation, will be public. They will spend the next decade fighting each other and their respective governments, while we disappear." She held out the encoder. "The key is complex, Leo. You need to dedicate your focus for the next 90 seconds to inputting the encryption sequence from your memory. Do that, and we both walk away clean. If you hesitate, if you try to run, or if you try to salvage your name, Marcus will intercept this signal before it leaves the relay, and we both end up in that dark pit with the drones." The weight of the last 24 hours settled on me. The betrayal, the chase, the calculated manipulation. I looked at Sparrow, at the single point of light, and knew this was the final, terrifying leap of faith. I plunged my hand into the messenger bag, feeling the cool, metallic surface of the encrypted drive. I began dictating the complex, multi-layered decryption sequence to Sparrow's encoder, my voice steady despite the lingering fear. 90 seconds stretched into an eternity. I could almost feel the real Marcus's net tightening above us, waiting for the single electronic signature that would pinpoint this location. The final sequence entered. The encoder screen flashed green. Sparrow slammed the execution button. "Transmission initiated," she breathed, watching the uplink monitor. 10 seconds to broadcast confirmation.
5 seconds until detonation sequence initializes on the drive. I stepped back, watching the drive in my hand, the object of so much corporate murder and espionage, begin to emit a faint, almost imperceptible heat. "Confirmation received," Sparrow announced, a genuine smile finally breaking through her composure. "The data is live. The drive is terminating." The encrypted memory core in my hand gave a soft, final pop, turning instantly into a pile of inert, grey dust that dissolved before it even hit the platform floor. Simultaneously, Sparrow pulled a master override for the subway platform's emergency lighting system. The single harsh floodlight above us winked out, plunging Sector 4 Gamma into absolute, suffocating darkness. "We move," she whispered. "Now. Marcus is about to realize the leverage he needed has just vaporized, and he's coming for the only remaining witness." We melted into the deeper shadows of the abandoned tracks.
Behind us, faint but distinct, we heard the sound of the exterior drone team breaching the storm drain access point above, their tactical radios erupting in frustrated static as they realized the target had vanished again, leaving behind only dust and the echoes of a massive corporate implosion already beginning to reverberate across the global financial networks. I was free, not by clearing my name, but by ensuring the evidence of the conspiracy destroyed the conspirators from the inside out.